host. All right, let's get it started then. Thank you, Colleen, for the introduction. So good evening, everyone. So thanks for coming to our town hall in the summer one term. And I always love and appreciate a space like this where we're together intellectually, emotionally, in a time that we might feel alone and isolated sometimes. So our goal tonight is to actually create a safe and a respectful space where our vulnerability provides opportunity for everyone here to expand your own capacity to understanding each other. So my name is Dr. Victoria Liu. I'm a full-time faculty here in the CMHC program at Chicago School. So this month, the month of May, almost over, is our Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. So I'm honored to have 3 colleagues here with me tonight to talk about our experience, both personally and professionally, as being the members of the Asian American Pacific Islander AAPI community, particularly in partnership with our student group, Brave Spaces for Diverse Students. So I'd like to introduce our 3 panelists, and including myself, so 4 of us. So I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Miss Grace Hockenberry, and you guys just met Grace briefly. Grace is a biracial Asian American cisgender woman that lives in Orlando, Florida. Her pronouns are she and her. She is a graduate assistant and a student with the Chicago School in the master level CMHC program, and is currently in the fieldwork portion of the program, and is hoping to graduate in December of this year. Yay! Thus far, Grace has worked with clients dealing with the depression, anxiety and stress, suicidal ideation, grief and loss related to COVID-19, identity development and self-esteem, trauma, relationship struggles, and sexual assault. Over the past year, she has started to explore more multicultural issues, particularly around racial and sexual gender minorities, and how those identities can impact one's mental health. So welcome, Grace. Our second panelist is Dr. Lotus Nelson. Dr. Nelson is an adjunct faculty at the Chicago School and a clinical faculty in Southern New Hampshire University. So Dr. Nelson is a licensed clinical mental health counselor in North Carolina, a board-approved clinical supervisor, a national certified counselor, and a national board for certified counselor minority fellow. Dr. Nelson enjoys her clinical work and is passionate in serving the underserved population with a focus on multicultural influences in being culturally responsive for individuals that she serves. She works in various areas of adolescence and adult mental health. She maintains her strong advocacy involvement by profoundly engaging in mental health wellness work, both in her immediate community and nationally. When she is not involved in her professional work, Dr. Nelson enjoys spending quality time with her husband and son. As a family, they enjoy traveling together. So welcome, Dr. Nelson. Our third panelist is Dr. Norman Kim. Dr. Kim is the co-founder and the principal of Institute for Anti-Racism and Equity in Mental Health and the deputy director of Ayana, hopefully I pronounced that right, Therapy, an online therapy app focused on providing culturally competent care to marginalized communities. He completed his Bachelor of Art at Yale and his PhD in psychology at UCLA. He's a regular national and international speaker, educator, and passionate advocate with a particular focus on minority status and the barriers to mental health care in marginalized communities. He's the founding co-chair of the Black Indigenous, and People of Color Committee of IAEDP on an inaugural Behavioral Health Task Force for the Gay and the Lesbian Medical Association, the co-chair of the Transcultural SIG for the Academy of Eating Disorders, and it serves on numerous advisory boards. So welcome, Dr. Kim. I am Dr. Victoria Liu. I'm a full-time faculty in Chicago School in our CMHC online program, and I have been a counselor educator since 2016. I'm a bilingual, so English and Mandarin Chinese counselor of my private practice in Houston, Texas. I completed my Bachelor of Science in Chemistry and Biology at University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and my PhD in Counselor Education Supervision at Sam Houston State University. My research and clinical interests are in the area of collaborative therapy outcome measurement, counselor education and professional identity in minority students, and the relationship issues from collaborative and narrative theoretical lens. So, during our time together in this town hall, 4 of us will begin to engage with each other in a conversation that is guided by 4 topics that's centered around our personal and professional experience as being a member of the AAPI community. So we like to invite you, the audience, to sit back and listen while you're reflecting on the questions I posted in the chat room, and periodically I will post again and again to make sure everyone have that in hand. Then we will leave about 20 to 30 minutes towards the end of our session to open the floor and answer any questions you might have for us. We also like to hear your perspectives based on our prompt questions or any process comments based on what you have observed from our conversation. So shall we get it started? That was a long introduction, wasn't it? So Grace, Dr. Nelson, and Dr. Kim, thank you guys again for sharing your space and time with us here. I'd like to begin our conversation by talking about this term, Asian American. Because I believe every one of us has experienced this term very differently. So I'm curious to know what has been your experience associated with this term, being an Asian American.
Hi, everybody. This is Norman Kim. I've had a somewhat fraught relationship with that term. I'm a first-generation immigrant. I immigrated from South Korea when I was about 5 years old. So I think for much of my growing up, part of the terminology, and I don't even know when it kind of came into my consciousness, but the last thing you want to be when you're little is to be different. And so for much of my life, it was a point of demarcation in a negative way. I found myself to this day really identifying much more as a person of color, which always felt a little bit more inclusive to me than the term Asian American. And then, Dr. Rush Wilson, with whom I've worked for a couple of years now, and who's the reason I'm on this panel today joining you. And I have talked about this a little bit, and it wasn't until I had kids. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old who are both mixed, and it wasn't until I had kids that sort of my own Koreanness and my Asianness became actually very, very important to me, because it became something all of a sudden that was transformed to be something that was something I wanted to pass down to my kids. So I have had this kind of like I said, sort of a contentious relationship with the term. If I try to take a step back and sort of speak from a little bit outside of my personal experience, I think one of the other ways in which it becomes problematic in a way that other terms don't is because, Asian Americans in particular, in contrast to maybe some other groups, there's always this sort of this connotation of foreignness to all of us. Yeah. It doesn't matter if you're 10th generation or if you're first generation, we're all kind of equal because we're not white, because we don't look American. And so, even though somebody who's white who might very strongly identify as being, Irish American or Italian American, nobody challenges their Americanness just because they have a connection to some other aspect of their culture. I think for many of us to say that we are Korean American or Japanese American or Asian American, I think the criticism is always that in some way sort of confirms that we're not real Americans, that we're always going to be foreigners first.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dr. Kim. I think I was preparing for our town hall today, and I realized that when it comes to minority groups, that we also have this geographic location that associate before the American, right? Asian American, African American, Hispanic American. There's certain kind of geographic location to it. I don't know what it was there. And then you just pointed out that it's that sense of belonging. Am I American or am I a foreigner or am I from somewhere else? That's really true.
I guess for me, it's Asian American and can be kind of complicated, but for very different reasons than Dr. Kim was saying. My mom was born and raised in the Philippines. I was actually born in the Philippines myself. My dad is from Texas. He's a redhead with green eyes and freckles. So a very, very pale man. And so I border on both. My mom, because she moved here, she really quickly tried to almost make an attempt at erasing her Asianness and fit into American culture as much as possible. She made the decision not to teach me and my sister Tagalog. There's very few words that I know. I didn't learn a lot about my culture. And, as Dr. Kim had said, when you're younger, you just want to fit in. So when my mom was different, I remember kind of shaking my head and feeling like she was stupid and not understanding that it wasn't that she was stupid. It's that she's from a different culture and she didn't understand some of the things. However, I know that I have personally I've never identified myself as white. I have always identified as an Asian American, which, as I mentioned in the introduction, I'm just now starting to really explore multiculturalism and realizing that just the term Asian American is almost a myth in and of itself, because there's really no such thing as Asian American. We are, and I know what Dr. Liu was saying, it's all geographic, but like, if you're looking at cultural standpoints, Chinese Americans, Filipino Americans, Japanese Americans, Korean Americans, we all have different cultures. Sure, there's some crossover, but there are a lot of differences as well. And so just having the term Asian American just doesn't seem to fit right. So that's something that I've been working with and struggling with and learning a lot about lately. And definitely the term that Dr. Kim was talking about is kind of like othering, or we're all foreigners, because people look at us and then the question is often, well, where are you from? And even if you say, oh, well, I'm from Florida, the question then becomes, well, where are you really from? And that gives the impression, even if you are 10th generation, that you're not American, you're not welcome here. So there's a lot of complexities to being Asian, and particularly for me, since people can't even really tell I'm Asian, since I'm half, and I grew up in Florida, and I look to many people Hispanic.
Thank you for sharing that, Grace. I had that question to me just recently. Someone asked me where you're from. Houston. No, like really, where are you from? Dr. Nelson.
Wow, what wonderful stories by you all. And there are certainly pieces that I can resonate with. The term Asian American for me defines me as a Filipino person who is living in America. And I'm very intentional in saying that because much like what Dr. Kim had stated, there is always going to be that sense that I am a foreigner. You look at me and that's all you see, right? And there's so many assumptions that are made. Um, this also means that I am in constant negotiation between my Filipino culture and the mainstream culture of America. Another factor of my Asian Americanness is attributed to being in an interracial marriage with a biracial son. And while all of these factors might seem like there are advantages in living in America as an Asian person, certainly as has been noted, challenges, there are many challenges that are worth noting. And Grace, I appreciate you saying, where are you from? Because that is a constant question that I get. And the underlying question, right, is no, really, where are you from? Right. So despite of, so self-disclosure, I immigrated to the United States when I was 12, 13 years old. So starting out my life here, and that's also that part of that whole negotiation, right? Starting my life as a child, as an early very young high school student. And we all know that kids can be brutal at times, and having to negotiate that, being one of the two minorities in my school in Pennsylvania at that time. So navigating through those challenges. A lot of questions like, what are you? Right. To Grace's point, looking at me, sometimes I look like I'm Latina and sometimes Asian, and sometimes they just can't tell what I am. So that question of what are you? No, really, what are you? Another question is, did your husband pick you up when he was in the military? Or better yet, did you guys meet online? Because a lot of Filipino women are online to meet husbands. Do you speak English? Or simply being ignored because I look like I may not speak English? And sadly, right, through the exposures and repeated experiences, similar experiences, at times you become tired of that, right? So there's, again, I keep going to that word of negotiation. Do I want to battle this conversation, or do I want to save my mental health, care for myself by not engaging? And a part of my excitement for tonight, to be a part of this conversation, is this is such a critical conversation. So there's also that piece of me too that's nagging if and when I don't pick that battle to engage in the conversation. Do I allow them to go off with their preconceived notion and assumptions about Asian people and Asian American people? So, so I guess in a nutshell, my experience as an immigrant are closely tied to, a lot of you all's experiences as it relates to culture shock, racial discrimination, language barrier, and as I mentioned, just that a challenge in, when I first migrated to the United States. A big part of my research is related to multiculturalism, and specifically around acculturation. I am very much interested, and a big part of that is because I care so much to learn and make it better for those people that's migrated here, and hopefully be a positive impact of that person's experience. So I can go on, but in a nutshell, Asian American for me is I am Filipino that's living here in the United States, who's constantly reminded that you do not belong here.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Dr. Nelson. And I can definitely relate that negotiation, that particular, that internal negotiation that we have. And I think for me, is this transition from being an Asian or a Chinese to an Asian American, and from a majority became a minority. That itself was a transition, internal transition for me. And that was in the beginning, it was much a struggle to actually feeling that I'm an outsider, which I have never felt for the first 18 years of my life. So, so that transition in itself is this concept, and also begin to actually to understanding who I am as a person. So I can definitely relate to that negotiation in between. And so based on our conversation so far, there's one term that stood out for me again, is this model minority myth. And we all know that it's a myth. But what are some, I'm curious, as being a model minority, I don't even know what that means. What are some implications that you have witnessed because of this myth, from your perspective, from your experience?
Go for it, Grace.
They're both aware that I have some strong feelings about this term. The model minority myth is very problematic to me. It was created to kind of pit minorities against each other in some way, and kind of put, it looks at, and basically the understanding of the model minority is like, these are the people who tried to fit in and they acculturated and they wanted to be like us. And why can't others be like you? And it puts it pits those other minorities against us. And the way that I see it is, this isn't we're not in a battle against other minorities. And Dr. Rush Wilson, the way she worded it was probably one of the best ways I've ever heard it, is refusing to rank others' oppression. I mean, everyone is oppressed in some way. I know we're going to talk about power and privilege a little bit later, but we all experience oppression, and we don't need to work against each other. We are working, the different minorities, we're working towards each other. So something that has come up a lot within this past year in particular is this argument that maybe because the Asians are being targeted for what's happening right now, maybe we understand what the African Americans and the Blacks have felt for generations. And it's almost like a competition of who's oppressed more. And the way that I see it, and I hope that more people start to see it, is we're all fighting for the same thing. We're all looking for equality and equity. And it doesn't mean your fight is different or worse than our fight. If I fight for you, that's also going to help me, and vice versa. If other groups are fighting for, Asian Americans who are currently, being persecuted, it's only going to benefit other minority groups, and we're only going to be stronger if we all work together. And I hate that this minority myth model minority myth, I have to use the full thing, is what is separating us. It gives us this, what's the word I'm looking for? This division, I guess.
So you're talking about this unity.
Yes.
Instead of separation, which one is better than the other, or which one, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, you're making such an important point, Grace, and I want to, I'm going to drag us down a little bit with by being even more pessimistic and blunt about it. I think, I think if you come at it from a critical race theory viewpoint, for example, and start at the point where the only reason that Blackness was invented, and it was obviously invented there, the idea of Blackness was invented for a very specific purpose, which was because we needed chattel slavery, or Europeans and the colonists needed chattel slavery to exist and to be justified, because everyone was quite clear that the economic interests of the European colonizing powers wouldn't survive without chattel slavery. So the idea of saddling, the idea of this pseudoscientific sort of categorization, and then saddling it with all of the various negative, attributions like savages and heathens and primitives, etc., to justify that was very explicit. This was not just sort of, people acting out of naivete and people of the time kind of, thinking a particular way, and we're looking at it through our modern lens. People at the time were very clear on why they were inventing this idea. And it was invented strictly for the purpose of requiring something to contrast with whiteness. And the reason I'm sort of going to that a little bit is because I think this goes to Grace's point, is that it's more than just pitting one minority against another. I think, consciously, unconsciously, I think it's also explicitly sort of, it's a statement that doesn't really serve to elevate Asians, really. It is a statement that explicitly is serving to denigrate Blacks, in contrast, in the way that Grace was describing. But I think most importantly, it also serves to alleviate whites of the responsibility of systemic racism. That's, I think, the real purpose of the model minority myth, right? Its function isn't, there's no real benefit in pitting one minority against another. There is tremendous benefit in alleviating people of having to think about the complexities of systemic racism, particularly as it impacts on Black Americans. By once again sort of inventing this thing that doesn't exist. There are all of the other arguments against the myth that I'm sure many of us are aware of, that Asians aren't a monolithic entity, that most of the time what they're talking about are relatively privileged and educated immigrants from Korea, Japan, and China, as opposed to many other Asian countries, and that a lot of the it makes very little sense to sort of group all Asian countries all together. I give you a side note. I'm sort of rambling a little bit, but I got really addicted to crime dramas from the UK. And one of the sort of interesting cultural differences I was noticing is that they use what's called an international classification system. And so they, in the UK, apparently, people from the Middle East are routinely referred to as Asian, right? So Middle Eastern males are referred to as Asian males, and it's certainly not how we would describe them. And so like having this other culture that's very similar to ours in so many ways, but where it's clear that sort of for different historical reasons, the idea of racial categorization just looks quite different there than it does here. I think in and of itself just illustrates the arbitrariness of these labels that we put. And it was jarring for me to hear it at first, because I was very confused watching these shows, because I was expecting somebody who looked like me, and that's not at all who they were chasing. So yeah, I think this is kind of the core problem of this myth, in addition to all of the other layers of problematic features.
Yeah. And thank you, Dr. Kim. That's very interesting. I haven't thought about from that perspective at all. But I think those kind of categorizing individuals have put a lot of assumptions, but also a lot of expectations, either that expectation is healthy or not healthy, on those group of individuals. And internally, we type of inherited those kind of expectations or assumptions, and we think this is something we need to follow. So yeah.
So I want to be mindful of our time, so I won't go into details, but just, we do have a lot of people here, and I want to make sure that everyone is aware of the definition of model minority and what that is. I don't want to make assumption that we all know what that is, but essentially it's this concept that Asian Americans are more successful, right, of the minorities that are out there because of perhaps their culture, their education, their hard work, and really puts these labels on Asian Americans that they are, and we are this hardworking people, we're smart, and we're just overall, educationally and financially, we are successful. And as has been mentioned, it really puts us against the other minorities, right? Which is not a healthy place to be in. And on the flip side of that too, because we're in clinical mental health counseling, when we start thinking about clients and their needs, so Asian American clients and their needs, and minority clients and their needs, being thinking about the pressure that we potentially are under because we're trying to live up to that model minority concept and whatever that may mean for the individual. And unfortunately, too, it's been suggested that even our elders, which, and I say elders because that has a different meaning for the Asian American people, even our elders have really gravitated to this model minority concept, which, there could be this understanding and even expectations of the younger generations to live up to that model, the minority model, right? So why are you potentially not as good as your Black friend? Why are you failing in school? And why are you not a doctor? And why are you working at a grocery store? So and so on and so forth. So as we think about mental health and our clients' needs, thinking about going there, going to that generational pressure that's been put on, that's really caused a lot of trauma for Asian and Asian Americans and in general minorities.
I completely agree with you, Dr. Nelson. That's one of the things that I'm thinking about when it comes to the model minority is that how many clients that I have seen that was taught to have that emotional suppression. So they needed to suppress their emotions. They cannot verbalize their feelings or to talk about those things because you just get on your life and work hard and you will fix it. So those are type of, just like you said, we inherited those kind of rules and regulations in what we do and how we process our own emotions. Oftentimes that leads to mental health struggles in life. And then individual mental health struggles leads to the whole family dynamic changes as well. So there's a whole lot of other underlayer issues that would cause that. So, and then Grace highlighted a little bit, but I think it's so important. I always believe that we need to understand our own privilege as well, because every one of us has power and privilege. That's where the resource comes in. That's where we can make some changes. So I'm curious to know, what are some of your powers and privilege in your position? And yeah, let's just say that. I can go first, actually. How about that? So I think my privilege, one of my privilege is that I think I have been very secure about who I am. I think it's the way that I was brought up. So the first time, like I said earlier, there was a transition for me. The very last year I was in grad school, I was doing a presentation in multiculturalism. And then doing the presentation, not even when I'm preparing my PowerPoint, it was doing my presentation, it just dawned on me, I'm a minority. And in that term and that understanding was never exist in my life because I was a majority in China. So what that transition gives me actually was a privilege. And I was talking to Dr. Nelson the other day. I was talking to her that when the Atlantis incident happened in March, that was the first time in my life I experienced fear for my own safety. And obviously, I was an hour and 30 minutes away from Atlanta. I was in vacation in the middle of the woods, nowhere, with my small family. So, and then it was targeting Asian females. So that was the first time actually I realized that I became fearful of my safety, and that it's a privilege itself because I have never experienced prior to that. And I think that was the security that I was provided to me from my family that gave me that sense of security of who I am and where I
am. This past year and the past few years, really, I've started to look at, power and privilege as well as oppression. Being biracial has granted me, some privilege that I may not have been granted if I was, 100% a minority, if I wasn't baffling to people when they look at me trying to figure out who I am, where I'm from, and things like that. This past year in particular, and I've had other experiences, I have not always felt safe, like Dr. Liu. Especially this past year, I have felt so much fear. The media wasn't posting about the attacks against Asian Americans for the past year. They haven't until the Atlanta shooting. But if you were tapped into some Asian communities, you were hearing about it, mostly through social media. And you would hear about all of these things, and it was terrifying for me. And with that fear, I also, because I don't look as Asian as some other people, I felt a sense of safety because I didn't. But that safety made me feel guilt for my Asian brothers and sisters who couldn't hide in the way that I can. Especially living where I am and the assumptions that are often set on me because of my appearances. That's definitely a struggle with both my power, my level of power and privilege, and the oppression that I feel due to my unique background.
Why can't you take off your shoes?
Someone want to join the conversation?
I mean, I have a somewhat similar answer, except that it's a much more sort of a much more I guess primal answer in some ways. I mean, my main privilege is being male. I think as as racist as we are as a society, we're equally, if not more so, a misogynistic society. And that's, I think for me, that's been the sort of a protective, something that's protected me from experiencing much more than I probably would have experienced if I weren't male. I think that's certainly the biggest, both in terms of sort of how seriously I get taken, how seriously like my opinions get taken, just the assumptions made about me, especially in like workplace kinds of settings, in career kinds of setting, professional settings. I think Asian men there are other downsides in terms of the stereotypes about Asian men, and but in general, in the course of my life, I think that's been a huge, being male has certainly served as a huge benefit, where I don't have to, men just generally don't have to worry about physical safety in the way that that women do growing up. We don't have to worry about sort of all of the all of the um, consequences of being sexualized in the way that girls and women have to worry about. And, you know, I work, my primary area of clinical work is in eating disorders. So this is something that's very, you know, very present in our clinical population. But, you know, but I also wanted to say, you know, Grace very poignantly talked about sort of that state of being either, you know, sort of ambiguous or being mixed and biracial. And I think that, along with the Atlanta attacks, I think illustrates really I mean, two separate things, but, you know, I do think there is a real price to be paid for passing, and that regardless of in what way one is passing. But, you know, I think there's a tremendous price to be paid for that experience, even though there might be some benefit to it in some circumstances. You know, it's more than a double-edged sword. You know, I think that's something that's not very well understood, and it's something that for me, as I think about my two boys, it's something that's very much on my mind. But I think the other, you know, this kind of goes back to what Dr. Nelson was also, I think, addressing. You know, one of the things that the Atlanta shootings really demonstrated was how unwilling we were as a society and the media as a thing to recognize anti-Asian racism. I mean, that's the whole reason why we're kind of gathered here with this topic. That, you know, there's, for as long as there have been Asians in this country, there has been profound level of racism and violence directed at Asians in America and in other places, but particularly here. And the fact that it took so much, and still, I think, you know, I still don't know that it's outside of some communities that those attacks were necessarily sort of unambiguously labeled as, you know, anti-Asian hate crimes. I'm here in New York City, and throughout this entire year, from the time that Trump started saying, you know, the Kung flu, you know, there have been attacks against Asian people here in New York City. So that, you know, the attacks in Atlanta were just kind of a culmination of a year's worth of that uptick in that kind of violence, and certainly verbal rhetoric and verbal violence.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Dr. Kim. And I think a lot of times that also those big events, but also microaggressions that we experience as Asian Americans, that oftentimes we don't realize that until when it's piled up, like it's just so much more. And then you realize that that's something more to just a simple comment. Dr. Nelson,
I don't know that I have a whole lot more to say. Pretty powerful stuff that's been said, but I will add. You know, one of my privileges is my role as a counselor educator, as being in higher education, who's you know, in charge of enrolling and accepting students, reviewing applications, right? So from an education piece, I certainly have that as, you know, as a privilege. So in so many ways, affecting lives, right? As whether they can move forward or not. And I'm very mindful of that. I'm humbled to be where I am. But at the same time, I'm very mindful with, you know, how my privilege can get in the way with people's lives. So yeah.
Yeah. And I thank you for highlighting that. I think a lot of our privilege is not just our gender, our safety, our where we're from, but also our positions in professional settings and in other settings that gives us a lot of privilege and power in what we do. So I wanted to be respectful of everyone's time. And I know this is such a rich conversation and we could go on and on for hours. And I just wanted to kind of open the floor to the audience. And if any of you have any questions for us, or you wanted to make some comments that based on our prompt questions, or any just process comments that you have witnessed from our conversations that you wanted to let us know, that would be awesome.
Jordan Mann actually posted a comment just a moment ago, or a question. She is a nanny to two girls. The older child is white, the younger child is Asian, and wanting to figure out how to speak to a child who's Asian American with that older white sister. She says, I don't think she's aware of it now, but when she gets older, what is the appropriate way to explain to her, yes, she's different, but support her and show her she can be strong in her difference? In my opinion, and what I had said is it starts with having the child identify her identity. Me and my sister, we have the same parents. Our parents are still married. I very strictly have always identified as Asian American. I don't have a good I don't really know why, but I have always identified as Asian American. Always. If I'm given two options, I will pretty much always just choose the one. My sister, on the other hand, she identifies as both. So that's, in my opinion, where I would start, in letting her decide for herself how she feels she is.
And I think that's very powerful. It's very empowering for a child to identify and to conceptualize who they are, and giving a room for them to do that, and then to making that choice on their own. Yeah, and I can only speak from, because I think that also it's a privilege, is that I don't have a biracial kid, so I don't have that struggle. So both of my kiddos are Chinese. So we have begun to have that conversation with them. And my daughter is 8, my son is 4. So my daughter began to asking ourselves, is she Chinese American? Is she Chinese? Is she American? So just with the 8-year-olds, I begin that conversation by just exploring what her definitions are, why she think those are different, and just have that gentle discussion instead of telling her what she should think. So just like you said, Grace, it's having that room, providing that safe room for them to actually discover on their own, right? Yeah. I don't know if Dr. Nelson or Dr. Kim has anything to add to that.
Is the floor open for everyone to speak?
Yes, the floor is open for everyone.
My name is MJ. Hi. I happen to be a dual citizen in a biracial marriage with biracial children, Latino, and I myself am Irish Cherokee. And I was just wondering, everyone, I understand that there's a lot of differences and issues that are going on in the world today, especially in this world that we live in today. But I was wondering if anyone had ever really thought that perhaps social media and news media outlets are creating a really sensational issue regarding the minority groups. I myself, I really don't know how to identify myself. I'm American, and I leave it at that. Or when I'm in Mexico, I'm Mexicana. And I deal with a lot of the things that you all have been speaking of when I am at home in Mexico. I get la gringa all the time, but it's just something that I've gotten used to. But yet when I moved back to the United States with my children, I find that every time I turn on the TV, or every time I'm, trying to look at like Facebook or any type of social media, and my children as well, it seems to be, like a politically weaponized topic. And I'm wondering if that's playing a huge impact on the way that we are seeing and dealing with things today in our culture. That was just a question that's been on my mind for a long time. And I'm wondering, you all are American. I mean, do you feel American? I mean, and if so, I would put that out there. I mean, you know, I would say, I am an American. I belong here. This is where I live. This is my home. And not let anybody offend you and by thinking otherwise. I mean, that would be a privilege. You know, you were talking about power and privilege. That would be a power and a privilege. And when I am living in Mexico with my husband and my children, I wear that loud and proud. You know, I am a dual citizen and I am both. And it, you know, it's just something that you know, I just think that you know, the political democracy has a lot to do with what's going on in the world today. And I'm just wondering if anybody else thinks that it has anything to do with the issues that are going on, like the young ladies that were actually shot and killed in Atlanta. That turned out to be a sex crime. When they did a full review on it, it turned out to be a sex crime, but it was sensationalized as being an Asian situation. And I'm just wondering if anybody else is thinking along the same terms.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Hi. Oh, hello.
Michelle.
Okay. Hi. How are you?
Hi.
How are you? My name is Michelle. I'm from New York City, and I identify as a Black American, Black Native American, actually. And to answer your question about the sensationalism of social media, yes and no. Now, from my, you know, life was all about perception, right?
Yes.
And as a Black woman in this country, and my family, generation from the South, right? My mother will be 90 years old next month. Prior to social media, prior to cameras all over the streets and, you know, things being recorded and everything, this has been a conversation in the Black kitchen for generations, okay? This has been something that we have as Black women, Black families, Black men. This is something that we have been talking about, the racism, the violent crimes, and particularly to our Black men. The reason why, you know, my grandmother was born in 1903 and she came to New York with the Great Migration. And the reason why she came here because my Uncle Sam was being chased by white men. They was threatened to kill him. All my life, I'll be 50 years old this year. All my life, I've heard my mother talk about all the violent crimes that have happened in the South with, you know, family members, friends, and whatnot. You know, men being dragged by the pickup trucks until their limbs are being torn off. Okay. So for me as a Black woman, and I've spoken to other, you know, my friends and everything, we are finally saying somebody is listening a little bit, not a whole lot. And today is the anniversary of what George Floyd's murder. And again, this is nothing new for us as Black people. This is something that we've always been going through, but we're now saying, you know what? It's a shame that it has to happen to other people. It's a shame that it has to happen on camera for someone to believe us. Because honestly speaking, we had a big crisis in this country, you know? And it started with the African American or the Black American, whatever one you're comfortable with saying. And
I'm from
as a Black,
Tennessee, so I do understand.
okay, you know,
I
and as a
agree
Black
with
woman,
you. Yeah, I agree with you on a lot of your points.
as a Black woman having a set of twin boys, and I have a 27-year-old daughter. My boy is a 10. I literally cried when I found out I had boys. literally, because no matter how they raise, they could come from a good family, you know, educated. People don't see that when they're walking in the street. They only see that black skin.
Mm.
You understand? And it's unfortunate that people are still thinking like this today, and they are, you know? And it's just like, it's like, as a Black woman, I am on a threshold of that can happen to me. You know, I could be, you know, just the same way as Tamir Rice or Trayvon Martin. I don't want to be that mother. And nobody wants to be that mother, but we've been suffering with this. Let me tell you, I was an early childhood educator for 18 years. And one of my parents, I was working in a 2-year-old classroom at this time. And it was the shooting in what is it? I don't know if it was Connecticut, when they went into the school, Stony, I forget the name of the school, but the elementary kids, and they went in there and took the children. Yeah, Sandy Hook, right. So one of my parents, he's Asian American, and his wife is Italian. And I worked in a very affluent neighborhood, Park Slope, Brooklyn. And he came in, you know, and he was talking about what happened. And I let him speak, and he said to me, you know, it's a shame because my white friends never cared about any of this until something happens to them. And I said to him, I said, well, you know, this is something that Black mothers been going through forever. This is a fear that for a long time, this is something that we walk around with, you know, we literally walk around. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to be really respectful of everyone's time, and because we have a
okay,
there's
no problem.
Student raised her hand, and thank you for sharing that. And I completely agree with you. That has been a systemic issues for a long time. And Grace, you had a hands up. I just wanted to be intentional when it comes to.
Yes. I'm also trying to be respectful of time. To answer MJ's question, I personally I'm half white. I married a white man. My father is a white man. I have been very embedded in the white culture. I still, if I walk into a room, and I don't know anyone, it's a room full of strangers, I will still look for another Asian looking individual in order to feel safe. So it's very difficult for me to claim being an American when I don't often feel safe in my own skin. And I do want to also, like I said, we are trying to be very respectful of time. These typically end at 9 o'clock. Believe me, I could go on about this for hours, like Dr. Liu said. Something I do want to bring up, because I have, you know, many of you here, there is a student-led there is a school organization, Asian Pacific Student Coalition. I put an announcement in the advising forum this Friday at 4 p.m. Central. They are doing a community check-in and support event for all Chicago school campuses in honor of Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. It is an AAPI community check-in support. If you are interested in that, the flyer is, like I said, it's in the advising forum for anyone looking to possibly continue this conversation. Because as you can tell, it's very needed. We had a lot of comments that I was hoping to get to, but we just didn't really.
Yes, absolutely. And I really apologize for anyone wanting to say more about your perspective. And it's such a rich conversation we have already started. And I really want to thank each one of you for your participation. And just like Grace said, we have our own student group, Brave Spaces for Diverse Students. So that's also a place for all of us, including faculties and students, to participate and be able to find a sense of community and support. So, so thank you guys all for coming and share this space and time with us. It's such of our pleasure to have all of you. And it's my pleasure to have Grace and Dr. Nelson and Dr. Kim to join us. And I wish we can continue to develop our conversation and just have this as a beginning of this type of dialogue to begin to understand each other rather than to assume each other's roles and positions. So thank you guys for for coming and sharing. I don't know if Colleen is here, wanted to say something before we end, or.
Hi, I'm here. Thank you, everyone, for your vulnerability and honesty. Much appreciated. Sorry, clock chimed at the beginning and at the end, so great timing. But I don't have anything else. Just again, thank you all. And if any of the faculty have any announcements, I know they're here tonight as well. So again, thanks everyone. If anyone else has an announcement.
Brave Spaces, I believe, meets the third Tuesday of every month. Alex, is that right? For anyone interested?
Yes, for anyone interested, we do meet the third Tuesday of every month. So conversations such like this amongst all diverse populations occur there. So please bring thoughts, questions, concerns. MJ, I would love to have you. Michelle Johnson, I'd love to have you. We look forward to continuing these conversations.
Thank you for the invitation. I would love to attend. I would definitely love to attend. And I just want to say that I feel everything that everyone said tonight. I just had thoughts that crossed my mind that I wondered if they crossed everyone else's mind. Everybody's going through a very, very hard time. So thank you for having me as well.
Yes, thank you, MJ. Anyone has other announcements that we wanted to have here?
I just wanted to say thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful town hall meeting. It was my first time attending it. And all I wanted to say, even at the very, very beginning, when Dr. Kim has said about how he felt inclusive with the fact that he said he identify as a people of color. And I think that as I was listening to him, I was just thinking that that's what I felt as well. And I have a lot to say about like what I'm not sure if it's not sure if it's Dr. Grace or not, but Grace or other panelists have said. But then I understand due to the time, but I really appreciate it and looking forward even for the future as well and be part of this whole group. So thank you so much for having me.
Of course, thanks for coming, Maha.
Thank you.
And Maha, I'm still a student.
How do we end this? Do we just click a button or?
Yep, leave.
Yeah,
Yep.
Top, there's his leave.
I'm so new to the Zoom thing and I'm still trying to figure out. I've got like a planet behind me. So
yeah. All right. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure meeting you tonight.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
It's good to see you, Norm.
You too. Talk to you soon.
See you soon. Good night, everybody.
Good night, Tiffany.
Thank you so much, Dr. Liu. It was amazing.
Of course, Dr. Foster.
Yeah, I always learn something from you guys every time I get to hear you speak.
It's such a rich conversation. Like I said, really, we can really do this like forever. Like it's go on and on and on. So much more.
Well, I think that it's an important first step, but not a final step.
Oh, for sure. This is just the beginning, the dialogue.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So good to have a lot of people show up today, which is awesome.
We had a third of our student body here tonight.
Really? That's nice. I'm glad.
High five, Grace.
I know, Grace. Such a good job, Grace.
Thank you. I've got to continue this in my internship 1 class on Thursday for supervision.
Dr. Nelson?
Yeah. I'm hoping Dr. Harris will continue the racial trauma groups. That'll be great.
Oh,
Yeah, he's off, and we're actually making him take his term off because he won't if we don't make it.
Yes, he needs it. He deserves it for sure.
I told him, I was on the phone with him right before this started, and I said, we will record it for you. You will be able to watch it. Just
We'll
say,
miss you too, but
just say I'm going to do my best to be on term off tonight. So yeah. Let's see.
Well, thank you very much for organizing this. I will talk to everyone later.
yeah, thank you, Grace, for participating. Thank you. This is amazing.
Good night.
Good night. Colleen, I just made you the host. Should I do anything else?
Hold on one second, Victoria. Let us just
No problem.
clear in the room. Who else here? Just us three.
Just us.
I'm here for a minute. Sorry.
I was just going to say, way to use your blocking skills, Victoria. You're amazing. You know, I think that it just speaks to the fact we need to do more.
Yeah, yeah. Colleen, this is still recording. Is that okay?
I was gonna say, if you wanna, let's stop it.